Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Human SOS Show. We're on episode 113, and today we're going to be talking about staying composed under pressure. Just remind everyone to be sure and type in your name and where you're joining from, and we always love to hear your questions and comments. So, Anton, you want to open us up today?
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining. We're talking this topic about, as we're talking about this topic today, it made me want to discuss it because of everything that I'm seeing on social media right now, right? There's a lot of people that are angry. There's a lot of people that are angry on both sides politically. There's a lot of people that are angry outside of our country. And honestly, I felt that talking about staying composed under pressure, it's really talking about that. But of course, it extends well beyond our current circumstances. It goes into the office. It goes into our relationships. It goes into everything and anything. And as we focus on that conversation, Kev, why is it important to stay composed under pressure? Even before we dive into, discussion of how to do it or some tips, why do you think it's so important that people don't become angry, that they don't really, you know, lose their S word? I mean, that's what I'm seeing happening right now is people are losing it all over the place. And I'm like, what is that accomplishing? What are you doing by just really spewing all that anger and losing that composure into the world?
Well, usually when we get that way, we are much more likely to make unwise choices in our words, in our reactions, in so many things. And we're advised that we need to be slow to anger, and the more we can maintain composure, less likely of making those unwise decisions, those unwise choices, uh, because when we're in that state of mind, we're in, as we talked about before, the lizard brain, and we're not using rational consideration. We're not looking at things in context. And so we just have a real challenge there. And uh, so, best not to lose it, generally speaking. Sometimes it's unavoidable, it seems, but most times it's a choice we make, and we need to choose wisely.
Absolutely. I'm seeing protests on the streets and things like that happening right now. And, I saw church was being vandalized. It was a church that helps with people that change their mind with abortions and kind of helping them alternative to abortions.
Right.
And, I'm like, what does that accomplish? Like, what did these people make happen by going and letting emotion overtake them and deciding that that was the right thing to do, right? Like, I look back on it, if I was that person, I'd say, what did I really do by making that action happen? I'm all for people standing up for what they believe. Whatever it is you believe, good for you. That's awesome. Like, I think that all opinions are valid. But when we lose composure, when we lose our ability to maintain our cool, we lose effectiveness to be heard. People think the louder I scream, the louder, I act out when these things happen, the more I'm going to be heard. And I'm like, no, you start to become ineffective. You start to, cloud the message you're sending and really making it all about your inability to stay cool under pressure, and it just makes me wonder what's going on in the world. And, we talk a lot about stress. That's just something that we discuss on the show a lot. And I think when high, high stake situations happen, like recently happened and continue to happen, um, people are just losing their cool a lot more because we're
Mm-hmm.
not present. You mentioned the lizard brain takes over, and we start to go all over the place with just uncontrolled. Like, it's this fear. It's this my thing is being taken away, and I don't know. It's tough to discuss this topic on our show because it's such a hot button. But I'm like, what's being taken away? Like, most states that haven't had abortions are still not going to have abortions. Like, you still can go somewhere else and get an abortion if that's what you want to do. But what I'm really starting to get upset by is, like, everybody. I keep reading white men did this, and I'm like, what do you mean? Like, I'm not seeing the connection between that. And I'm like, beside the point, if somebody wants to accomplish something, why are you going to blame an entire quarter of the population? Probably not quarter, but still like half of a race, right? And what are we going to accomplish by that? Like, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't understand what I did. Why am I being felt that way? And that's because people are losing their cool and now they're just finding somebody to blame, and that somebody is not often the right person.
Hmm. Yeah, that is part of losing our cool. Is we? Uh-oh, Anton, your volume. I mean, your sound. Something's happening with your sound.
Is it quiet?
Oh, hang on.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, but okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, I'm just, and that's, I feel like and we can bring this back more towards, a less hot topic, but
Mm,
leaders that get angry at their teams for underperformance, right?
mm,
That's a very common one that we see in our world, and they're sitting there and they're angry at their team, and they're showing a lot of, that's another thing. There's a difference between just being a little angry and showing frustration and showing, you know, um, that you're upset that something didn't happen. But how you show that, you
mm-hmm,
can't lose your cool, because once again, as I already said this, the minute you lose your cool, your message is something else. It's not about here's what I'm talking about. It's here's how I can't control myself. It's here's how I'm better than you, or it's here's how anything and everything besides what I'm trying to say.
mm-hmm.
Have you seen that in leadership? Does it still happen in leadership circles? I haven't been in real world for a while. I do everything virtually, and people don't really lose their cool as much on the, you know, over
Not on
the
camera
virtual chat.
anyway.
Yeah, easy to turn the mic off and easy to turn the camera off, and all of a sudden everything's okay.
Yeah, it's again, it's just unfortunate that people uh, get let go like that, and when we're in that state of mind, we say
Easy to
things
turn the mic off
that
and
are unfiltered, that are uh, that don't make sense, and they're hurtful. And quite often, we will destroy relationships with our words in those moments of losing our cool. And you see lifelong friendships even destroyed in that circumstance by people saying things that they don't intend to because they've lost their cool. And it becomes so emotionally charged. At that point, there is no rational conversation involved. There is no let's find common ground, let's find understanding, or at moments being able to rationally come to uh, terms with agreeing to disagree. So that's the problem with not staying composed. Good morning, Zaid. Glad that you found us. Sorry about the confusion on the event. It's been interesting this morning already, but that's what we do to keep our composure, right?
You know where I'm guilty of this, honestly, it's as a parent. Like, this is where I think I get into trouble the most, is just losing my cool with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes me, we talk about this all the time. Parenting, leadership are not that different. And even though I wanted to send the right message, right? I think a couple days ago, my kid's room was just a disaster. My middle daughter's, I walk in and it's real dirty, and I've been trying to work with her, trying to talk with her, and just not listening. And so I lost my cool a little bit, raised my voice a little too much, and afterwards, like, I'm going and having to apologize to her because I feel guilty about losing my cool. But then I'm looking back on it, I'm like, I just confused this poor little kid. Like, I was trying to send a message that, hey, this can't happen. You can't be doing this. Now I'm going and apologizing because, I yelled at her, but I'm like, she doesn't know what she's supposed to do now. Like, I did nothing by that. If anything, I just made things worse. And that's a common one that I find myself in, is when my kids do something, I lose my cool. But what usually happens is this wrong story runs through my head. it's like, oh, she doesn't care about what rules we have in the house, or she doesn't care about what, what I'm asking from her. And
Mm,
all of a sudden, like, where my mind went right away is the craziest place. It's like, I do all this for you. Why can't you just do this for me? It's like she was doing something against me, but that was never her intention. I guarantee it. And then I start thinking back when I was a kid. I'm like, I did this all the time too. Like, it's just what children do. That's just something that we have to keep reminding them and helping them. And it's not an action against us. It's just we have to find ways to be a reminder system for them and hold them accountable in ways that works for them. And I'm in the audience. I'm sure you guys have agreed. If you have any stories of that with kids, let us know. But that's one that's I'm guilty of myself.
Now, part of the issue that brings about the situation is that we let things go and go and go. We avoid those conversations. We avoid in our mind what is conflict. And so we keep avoiding to a point where we can't keep avoiding. And that's when we lose our cool because we've allowed an emotional response to build up and build. And finally, we just kind of explode. And so not addressing the situations part of it too is it's not convenient. uh, Responses versus reacting is not always convenient, and therefore we tend to put it off and avoid it, and it doesn't generally go anywhere well, especially in the relationships where we know that we're responsible for the reactions and behaviors of others. So, any leadership role, if we put things off, ignore it, put things off, hope it'll get better, we generally are putting ourselves into a place where we're going to lose our composure. And now, different situation if we're talking about people that we are not directly responsible for, that can be a different situation. You have to approach it differently. But again, parenting, leading a team, if there's something you observe that is an issue, we have to bring it out and address it in a cool, calm situation, and but do it early because, like you said, when it builds up, it becomes an affront, it becomes a personal attack, all kind of emotional things that aren't accurate. So,
She's 10. She's my middle one. Um, Kev, I don't think you ever get angry. Like, I swear, like you're always just a cool cucumber, man. Like, I'm like, I wonder if Kevin ever gets angry. I wonder if Kevin, like, do you ever yell? When was the last time you yelled? Is that something
oh,
that happens
I
ever?
have my moments.
Yeah.
In fact, recently, as I was working with the um, Skills USA event, we were trying to get things broken down and packed up. And I'm on a forklift, and one of the team leaders came over and said this and that and the other. And, uh, we were all tired, and I screamed at him and said, "Come over here and show me what you're talking about." and But the other one that I deal with on a regular basis, and I'm still working on, is driving. Um, in Atlanta traffic, I do not keep my composure as well as I should driving. I guess because it's just me in the car most of the time, so I feel like I'm not causing any problems. But the reality is, even then, I am causing a problem for myself because I'm not training myself and not have using self discipline in that case. But I've been blessed, I guess, to have a very long fuse, and so I count that a real blessing because I know a lot of people, boy, that it doesn't take long. Somebody say something, do something, and they explode, and their composure's out the window. But yes, I
Have you
do.
always have you always had that fuse, or have you built that up over years?
No, I have to say, I'd love to claim that I'm, really grown and done all that, but I have to give credit to God for blessing me in that fashion. And part of it too is that I have learned to make choices to not put myself in situations where I am tempted to blow my cool, and that's a conscious effort at most times. And but yeah, I'm. I wish I could claim that I'm that super guy, and I'm not. I'm just blessed.
Mm-hmm. Zaid's got a comment there, I think.
Yeah, he says that I noticed these days stress and drivers is not cool anymore. Yeah. Well, and I think for all of us, that it depends on the setting as to what triggers us. Some people drive and among crazy traffic situations and just as cool as a cucumber. And I pray for being like that, but others get in situations like at work, and they lose their composure. And I think it has to do with our triggers, and part of what I've had to do with my triggers in driving is to identify what are those triggers, because um, understanding what are the triggers help me to begin to keep my composure. One of them, and this is a common one, and it depends on different situations, but is motivation. Why do these people do this? And when I challenge myself and say, no, they didn't just cut me off because they wanted to irritate me. They cut me off because they made a bad choice before or whatever, a lot of different things, but it wasn't a personal attack or a personal affront to me. It was a choice. It may not have even been a good choice, but the likelihood it was, you know, pointed at me is very small. So when I can learn to back up and say, that was not meant for me directly, it was just a situation. And the other one that I do is that uh, I know this is hard to imagine, but I'm actually not a perfect driver either. And when I remind myself of that and go, okay, I've done that very same thing before. So who am I to get upset at someone else? Um, and that's another trigger for us, I think, is we see people mirror our behavior, and it's not uncommon that we will get upset over it. And as Bible even talks about it, where we are straining gnats and swallowing camels, or where we're not removing the plank from our own eye and trying to remove the speck from the other person's eye. So, um, just
It,
perspective.
it's
Well,
interesting to me that you mentioned. Oh, just give some shout outs real quick.
yeah, welcome, Navara and Richard. I'm glad you guys found us. I know there was a little confusion this morning. Thanks for chasing us down. I appreciate it. I put the link out there uh, for it. But anyway, thanks for finding us. Glad to have you this morning.
But yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned when you're in the car, you feel like you're by yourself, and that's when you tend to lose your cool more. And I think it's probably
Mm-hmm.
for me similarly as well. And that's something for us to, what it makes me think about is there's really two stages or two types of ways of losing your cool. One is just the feeling of needing to or wanting to, and
Mm-hmm.
then the permission to do so. In a
Mm-hmm.
way, I think we do give ourselves permission to do so, just we don't realize it sometimes, right? And that's how we can see that, okay, if there's nobody around me, nobody can really see me and judge me, that's when I'm more likely to do that. Or when I'm around people that don't know me, that are not going to change the view of me, that's when I'm more likely to do that. I think, like I said, it's the same thing for me. And it just makes me think that there's a difference between having an impulse to lose our cool and then actually going there and doing it, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think it's normal to have anger. It's normal to have frustration. It's normal to have, all these emotions and feelings. But what allows us to not do so is bringing back to rational thought and thinking about all the different things we just talked about, whatever allows people to think through that and being like, what does this accomplish? What does this do? With driving, it always gets me, right? We're sitting there, we're getting angry, and half the time people don't even know that we're angry at them, unless we gave them the bird and we really went that far. But most of the time, they have no clue. They're just going along about the business. They didn't know they cut us off. They didn't know whatever, and we're sitting there with steam coming out of our ears, thinking like, "How dare you do this to me?" Right? Like that's. And I'm like, here I am doing this right now. It's ridiculous. So that's the first biggest tip for people to really take away is it's okay to have those emotions. I think that very few people are on a level they're not going to experience those emotions. But the
Yeah.
faster you can return to rational thought, the more controlled the response will be, if there even will be one.
Well, and for me, my faith factors into it, because I can convince myself there's nobody else in the car because there's nobody else in the car. But what I have to remind myself is that I may not have any physical person in the car with me that I can hurt or offend, but my Heavenly Father sees me and is with me all the time and can be hurt and let down by my behaviors as well. And the more I'm aware of that, not that he's there to, be a, I don't know, a cosmic killjoy, as one of the sayings I've heard that I like is, but he's there to help me grow and learn and um, uh, live abundantly. And when I do that, that he's there, he's aware, and it hurts that relationship on some level as well. And so my faith, it becomes a factor in it and helps me to also maintain composure. And in fact, I like Zaid's comment. He talks about the 2 second rule. Don't, one of the things is just stop, uh, don't use self control. Do use self control. Count, wait just a few seconds, and then bring it into perspective. Um, Welcome, Denise. Glad to have you with us. Appreciate you joining. So, yeah, anonymity that we think we have when we behave poorly is is not a good reason, but we use it a lot. And in fact, I think that's part of what drives the responses on social media. We think we can hide behind a glossy profile and say things that we shouldn't say or behave in ways we shouldn't behave because we think we've got some anonymity there. And, um, it doesn't work. People see it, people understand it, and most people don't care for it. And so, um, we've got to approach it ahead of time. Even, for example, one of the things that I've learned to do, or is as I get into the car, remind myself people are going to behave the way people are going to behave, and I've got to set an expectation to understand it and not um, allow myself to be driven by it.
It's interesting you mentioned social media because I have used the delete button very often over the last few weeks, really the last week, maybe even less. Sitting there just steaming from reading what I've read and then writing this long comment, and not even necessarily being nasty, but just really strongly disagreeing with it. And I was like, what am I accomplishing? Like, I'm not going to do anything with this. Like, this comment's not going to change this person's opinion. All it's going to do is create more of a fight with everybody and make myself look bad in the process. I'm like, delete, delete, delete. So sometimes, like, email, similar thing. Sometimes you get a bad email. Like, coming back to these 2 second rules, write it out if you really feel like it. Then give it a little bit of space between when you wrote it, when you read the initial thing, and then see if it's still needing to be said. And then what is going to be accomplished by you saying that. And if the answer is not much, and if all it's doing is just like, releasing that pent up emotion, then just go say it to a mirror. You don't need to put it on social media and just get it out somehow. But like it's just the same thing. You might as well be saying it to a mirror, except this way it makes you really look really bad. Even
Yeah.
if it's the right thing to say, sometimes or you feel like it needs to be said, it's pointless.
Navarra has a great comment. She says triggers are unprocessed emotions. We're all just containers of those triggers, and it's global now. Yeah, with social media, yeah, it is gone beyond our next door neighbors or the guy in the car next to us. It's become a much bigger picture. Um, again, though, it's we always talk about being intentional, and same thing about maintaining our composure is we've got to be intentional in approaching it. Uh, the other thing that for me to think about is the consequences of not. And when we start really considering the consequences of not losing our composure, it also factors into containing it. I mean, I know that okay, I'm going to tell a true story, and this is related to my driving. And I learned about consequences. Where I live, there is a unique intersection. It's a T-type intersection, so it's a three-way intersection, and it's very unusual because there's also a railroad track involved. And so the people coming across the railroad track are supposed to have the right of way regardless all the time. And it's become an issue where people almost crashing or cutting each other off and so on. Well, one day, and it's a pet peeve of mine because it's very well marked from signage standpoint. So I'm coming across the railroad tracks onto the towards the intersection, and a car to my right does not yield as the car is supposed to. So I do my usual cool, calm, collected, shaking my finger and fussing and all fuming at the driver. And within about 3 or 4 seconds after my reaction, I realized the other car was my wife. And you talking about us all kind of emotions and considering consequences and all that happened all at one time, and in the end I felt like a fool. I felt like a heel. And even though I was technically in the right, my reaction was not a good reaction. And now, fortunately, we were able to get a good laugh out of it afterwards and chuckle. And she said, apologize. She said I was wrong, and but that could have been a potentially very damaging situation, bad consequences over allowing that kind of loss of composure. And but real world.
That's a heck of a story, man. That's funny, but not funny. It's but yeah, that's very often what happens. We let it go, and then we once we let that anger go into the world, there's no way of taking it back, right? It's like you've let it out. It's out there. And what's interesting, is as I was, thinking about Nagira's comment, a lot of the stuff we carry in this bag, this proverbial bag, has nothing to do with the situation. It's
Mm-mm.
stuff from other things that we're just bringing into that moment. And just reminder, if you're trying to stay cool and composed, deal with things when they need to be dealt with. Have the conversations that need to be had. Take care of your mind and your brain and find ways to be present in the moment and be mindful of the situation. Because oftentimes, like I was started this conversation with my daughter, it wasn't really the room. It was probably something else that I was dealing with that morning, that day, whatever it is, that was the final thing that broke the camel's back, right? The straw that broke the camel's back, and she became the outlet of that anger and
Mm-hmm.
of those bent up emotions. And we just can't do that to people. Like we can't just unload. We have to find ways to do that throughout every day. If you're like me and you're prone towards, being a hothead, that's what I am. I know this about myself. I've been that way in sports. I've been that way in everything. Then I need to find ways to release it. I need to go talk. I need to go punching bags if I have to. Find something, lift weights, to just to get it out of myself, because otherwise people become victims of that pent up emotion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, properly processing these emotions that we grapple with is important. Welcome, Santa. Glad to have you with us. Let's see. Richard has a comment. He says more and more people are feeling a right to say whatever crosses their mind at whatever time they believe they should, seemingly with no understanding of how it lands with others at whom these comments are directed. There are more and more people that are perpetually offended or perpetually defensive, and there is a pervasive lack of civility. No doubt about it. We see evidence of that all over, and that I think a key thing that Richard brings out is that we all tend to live in a state of defensiveness, and uh, the for me the antidote for that is we don't have need to be defensive because of our value as a human being. We are created with intrinsic value, and we don't have to prove our value. We shouldn't have to, but we all try to do it in different ways at different times. And our emotional response to these situations is quite often because ultimately it comes down to a challenge of our value as a person. The reason they're doing that is they don't respect me. They don't think I'm worth showing that respect, whatever. And as a result, they devalue me as a human. No, the reality is that you can do whatever you want. You can say whatever you want to me, but you're not going to change my value. You can't. You don't have that authority nor power to do so. I can't even uh, change my value by doing or not doing because that's a given. And when we can gain that level of understanding of our value, then for me, and I believe this is a principle of a wise principle that when we can relax in that and not try to prove our value all the time, we will find ourselves in less emotional state, especially defensive state towards other people and what their behaviors are. Um, and that's
That's
all.
so big, Kev. Like that statement's so big because it just hits me right, between the eyes for me personally. I've already said I'm a hothead, and that is 100% why I'm a hothead, because I come from a family that everything I was always pushed. I was always, I don't want to say nothing was ever enough, but it was always asked to do bigger than what I did before, something more. And my parents
Mm-hmm.
wanted me to grow up to be the best that I can. I get it. But now I'm the kind of person that always feels like I have to prove that I'm worthy. I have to prove that I can get what I didn't get when I necessarily was a kid. And I think that's the biggest source of my anger, is that when I say something and it makes people's response makes me feel like they value me less, that defense mechanism comes out, and
Mm-hmm.
it's usually very emotional. It takes me back to those childhood years, whether I consciously understand it or not. It's usually the not side, but the response is very strong. It's like a little
Mm-hmm.
kid throwing a temper tantrum that doesn't feel like his parents love him. And I'm not saying my parents don't love me at all, but like that's the thing that like plays out in my head and puts me back into that state. So I think that's such a key comment, man. Thank you for making that.
Well, I went through this years ago when I was, and it was a work relationship that this colleague and I, fortunately, on a daily basis, we didn't work together. We were out in the field, but every time we would come into the office for a meeting or whatever, within 5 minutes, we were debating something. And then quite often it went from a reasonable civil debate to an argument and emotional, and it took me a while to come to some realizations because I was sure if he would just listen, that we could make this amicable, and that it was certainly his unwillingness to hear an opposing view that was the problem. And after uh, a process going through, I realized that my reaction to him had nothing to do with him directly. It was based in some childhood emotional issues that had been unresolved, and part of it goes what ultimately the root was, it challenged my value as a person. You know, if some this person didn't agree with me, they are saying I'm not as good a person, that I am lacking. And so working through that process, as the term like to use, is working through this wound. And uh, I'll try not to get too nerdy here, but uh, the it's interesting because we all have wounds from our childhood. Because we all have imperfect parents, just like we are not perfect parents. And the uh, these wounds are deep seated to a point that most of us, if we really start digging down, we will find a snapshot in time as a youngster that is plays in our head like a movie in perfectly crystal clear color, and we can hear the words and everything, and it freezes us emotionally. And so I worked through and began to understand it. And once I began to address it, and I even was fortunate enough that I was able to address it with my parents, and and that started a healing process. The other piece of this wound situation, that us guys are especially have a challenge with it, because we are good at compartmentalizing and stowing those areas of our life. The ladies out there are much better at allowing those situations to come to the forefront. And I probably am going to be offensive to somebody, but in circles that I run in, ladies are good at braiding hair and crying together. And that helps them to be able to address some of those deep emotional things. Us guys are not, because we box it up and pretend like it didn't happen, doesn't exist, not realizing it really does, and it will factor in, and at some point it'll show up. And so, dealing with that emotional wound can be a root address of the things that cause us to lose our composure, especially if it's a short fuse response. That means it didn't even build up at that moment. It's because it was built up from years ago.
You know,
Welcome. Let me give a shout
right.
out. Welcome, Dr. Lisa. Glad to have you with us. Thanks for the comment. So, your thoughts,
it's
Anton?
it's it's interesting as you brought like crying, the word crying, because a lot of times when we talk about staying composed under pressure, we're thinking about not getting angry, not getting to that showing anger towards others. But crying is just a similar thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with crying, like perhaps there's with anger, because a lot of times with anger, we feel like there's a lot more victims around us. We make people, be victims of our actions. But sometimes crying can be just as bad.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when somebody sees somebody cry, they internalize it, they walk around with shame, like they made that happen to the person. It crying is also can be a form of losing our cool, and it usually happens in similar ways where somebody didn't deal with their emotions. They just bottle it up, bottle it up, bottle it up, and it eventually comes out. And that's just a form of how it comes out. It spills over, as Zaid's comment, our tank of emotion is full in other places, and one extra drip in the tank causes the flood, right? And sometimes that flood is some tears versus an outburst of anger. Neither is an appropriate response. It means that we haven't dealt with something properly, and now it's coming out in those
Mm-hmm.
uncontrollable ways. And the other part, listening to you, talking, is I'm thinking about conditioned versus unconditioned versus conditioned responses versus logical responses, right? And when we're not taking care of ourselves and we're not managing our stress, this is what we talk often about on our show. And we tend to go with conditioned responses, those
Mm-hmm.
things from childhood, those things that have happened and created trauma within us. And if we want to avoid those, first thing we have to do is change the state that we're in. This is something
Mm-hmm.
that we don't talk enough about as society today. The state that we walk around on a daily basis is not the right state to be walking around in. We're not taking care of ourselves nutritionally, mentally, physically,
Mm-hmm.
not enough sleep, too much overstimulation of the brain. We talk about all these things. And then we're like, well, how do I not do that? And we have all these tips and tricks, of which many we've discussed. But I'm like, fundamentally, all of those things are much easier if you are in a good state where that tank is not near full, where that tank has plenty of room within it to take
Mm-hmm.
additional things on before it overflows.
Well, what's unfortunate, and to use the analogy, and Zaid, that's a great analogy, is that uh, the part that is really bad is that tank that's full of this um, emotional stuff that's been around for years, and it's especially nasty. Stagnant water over time will become very dirty and nasty and smelly, and same way with emotions. When we have those emotions that are rooted so deep and have been unaddressed for so many years, I can assure you, when we do explode and we do let them come out, it's just as smelly and foul and nasty as that stagnant water. And in fact, a lot of times people will have that reaction, and then after it's happened, they go, "Oh my, where did that come from?" They just don't even realize that it's there, and that's why better now to address these internals and and uh, and deal with them before they explode like that. In fact, Richard makes a salient comment here. So often it has more to do with the relationship we have with ourselves and with others, and that is so key. And we talk about this. We talk about stress and managing those things, and we also talk about the assessment that we have and how that our goal is to find the root, dig down deep, and figure out what is causing this, not what the symptoms are. And that's where it becomes so important, uh, is to uh, is to dig down and find the root that causes those reactions. And it can be tough. I mean, especially, and this is the hideous one, is when we're reacting because we are correct in our what we see happen and say that is not correct, but we respond in an inappropriate way. And it's easy to justify and say, well, they did this wrong or that wrong or the other wrong, and be correct in what we say, but very incorrect in how we react to it. And
It's like we said in the beginning, like you can be as right as you want to. You can have the correct answer, but the delivery matters, right?
mm-hmm,
Delivery is so important. And if we don't stay composed, this is, bringing it back to business, relationships, it doesn't
mm-hmm,
matter. Like oftentimes we want to do good, we want to help, and we want to correct the situation. Just like as an example, when you mentioned the forklift situation, right? You
mm-hmm,
just want to solve it. You want to get to the root cause so you can finally get out of there. But the way that it came out, it's like, shoot, now that is a strain in a relationship that's going to be long term. And yeah, I may have quickly corrected something, but the impact is way worse than if I would have just taken the time and let things play out a little bit differently, or taken the time to have a conversation. And coming back to my daughter, the same thing, right? My my desire was to course correct her so she remembers to do things that she needs to do, keep her room clean and stuff like that. But the outcome was, is much bigger than I think. And like, maybe even bigger than I realized in terms of her long-term trauma. Like, who knows how that affects her in the
mm-hmm.
long, in a long ways. And then that affects my relationship with myself, because now I feel like an a-hole. And now I'm walking around the rest of the day thinking I'm not a good dad and I'm terrible. And all of that has unforeseen connections that lead to other things, and that's a huge problem. And just reminding folks, as you brought up the assessment, like it's we need to live in a sustainable way as human beings. And it's tough because every time I mention the word sustainability, everybody goes towards, our planet.
Mm-hmm.
All for that. I'm all about that. But the planet's going to outlive you and me by a
Mm-hmm.
long shot. We need to treat ourselves more sustainably. We talk about this very big concept thing, and we have so much care and passion about how we feel about our planet and that sustainability. And like I said, I'm not putting that down. But at the same time, I'm watching people getting 5 hours of sleep and they're preaching to me about, global warming and pollution and things like that, while they're putting junk and all sorts of things, whether it be from mental junk to physical junk with nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, slow down. Like you can't be effective with a lot of this other stuff until you start sustainably treating yourself.
Yeah, it's I appreciate the value of being good stewards of our planet and all that, but I think we need to adjust our sense of urgency to consider the sustainability of ourselves, and that is a higher concern as of this moment than our planet issues. And doesn't have to be either or, by the way. It can be both and should be. But we have a lot of people that are not addressing the personal, internal uh, issues that they're working through to be that they need to be sustainable, but they're quick to uh, look at environmental things, and that concerns me. Uh, an example that I actually experienced years ago, saw, I don't know if you remember the boat Greenpeace. They actually had a boat that they gathered to protest the way the oceans are handled and all that. And I actually saw this in a port here in Georgia, and there were some ironic behaviors going on. First of all, this was an old diesel vessel that is not going to be environmentally friendly, roaming around out in the waters. And then the second observation is the people involved that were on the boat. So obviously they were people part of this movement. They're smoking cigarettes, and I'm thinking, okay, you have the right and should express, and but why not start where you are with who you are first before you go. I remember now, their goal was to protect whales. That was their big mission. And but the irony of it, I wanted to say, do you not see that the better first step is to deal with your own personal challenges and your own personal health, to be able to then be at a better place to deal with the earth and sustainability and environment and all that. And so again, I think we need a greater sense of urgency about dealing with our own relationship with ourselves, as Richard mentioned, rather than these other concepts and all that. Again, not to diminish one or the other, but we don't seem to make it a priority to deal with our own personal things. And it what I don't think people understand is when we don't deal with those things, the effect on us, not just in terms of composure, ultimately, it will affect us from a health standpoint. It definitely affects us from a relationship standpoint. And we, the very thing we're trying to establish ourselves as valuable, important, whatever, it actually works just the opposite. Quite often, we end up looking foolish and say silly things and regretful things. So, uh,
We cover a wide range of topics on the show. Anything and everything we've talked about it over the last 113 weeks.
mm-hmm,
Um, but it all boils down to treating yourself sustainably, right?
mm-hmm,
Like if you were to say what is the central thing that everything connects to? It's this thing. It's why we use hashtag human SOS.
mm-hmm,
Humanly sustainable operating system. It's how we do it at work. It's how we do it at home. And one way or another, it would be 10%, 75%, 50%, it connects as a root cause to all of these different things that we're talking about. As a society, we've labeled them in many different ways. We've talked about it, and we feel like there are these individualized problems. And we're just trying to show that if we look at this as a really centralized root cause
Mm-hmm.
and we start to really focus on this one thing, so many things are going to improve. And we keep chasing the leaves, right? Me and Kevin talk
Mm-hmm.
about a tree analogy all the time. The symptoms are the leaves on a tree, and we're trying to solve each and every single one of them instead of looking at a tree holistically and saying all of this is coming from one central root cause. And when we can address and heal and work on it at the root cause, all
Mm-hmm.
those things are going to get better off, right? And we don't have the time and resources to be able to fix every little leaf. It's just impossible. So we have to change our perspective as society and start going after those roots.
Indeed, we really do, and I think about at times plant care. I've watched people go and actually wax the leaves, polish the leaves, and all that to make the plants really look attractive and clean and neat. And I think to myself, and that's fine, that there's appropriate for that. But if the roots of that plant are bad, too much water, too much fertilizer, too little fertilizer, whatever, there's a point where the leaves are going to become so damaged and the appearance so bad, we can polish and clean all we want, and it's not going to look good. Now, sometimes it takes a while. And what's scary is the number of people that wait till the leaves are brown and curling or whatever condition before they start realizing, okay, there's something at issue with the roots. There's a problem with the core of the plant. But by the time that happens, it's not uncommon that the plant is damaged beyond control. At a minimum, it has to be pruned back remarkably and may never be the same size and shape and beauty that it was to begin with. And that's why we really encourage folks to look internally, look to figure out. And that shows up. And one of the big symptoms in our current culture is the way we manage our stress and the levels that we allow them to be at and get to before we address it. And so, encourage you to consider, if you haven't, taking the assessment that's on our website, because the goal of that is we've identified three pillars and then components below that till we get down to a total of how many, Anton?
12.
Principles, 12 principles that we all share in one way or another, that you dig down. And if you can identify those relationships, those principles, you begin to have a, a an understanding of the area that is creating your challenges. And we don't, in fact, we will discourage you from trying to do a complete 100% correction of that issue once you discover it. That's why we have the 10% branding. Take a small step in the area that you struggle with the most to make a change. And a small step is effective. It may not be quick, but it's effective in moving forward to address those issues. And again, back to Richard's comment, to improve our relationship with ourselves a little bit at a time. And that's the healthy way to do things. I know the other challenge we face, and even for me driving, this is an area I want people to we're on the road to get places and get done with things. Let's move it, move it, move it. And the reality is, we've got to slow down. We've got to understand it's not instant. It's not going to be instant, shouldn't be instant. And that's a principle, again, one of those abiding principles, and understanding, giving ourselves time to address these issues and to adjust a little bit at a time is much, much healthier. Um, so,
Zaid's got a comment there. Zaid, sorry we missed that topic. If you would, whatchamacallit, if you would just, if you want to type in right now, like if you were to call, I know you mentioned communication, but if you were to call and title that show that you want us to, the topic that you want us to talk about next week, what would you make that title be? Communication is kind of broad.
yeah,
So if you want to just type in and say, here's kind of the angle that I want you guys to take next week, we'll go ahead and do that. So just whenever you get a chance or right now, just type that in there.
right,
But folks, I just want to give Zaid again a shout out because he's often given us topics to discuss, and that's our favorite with me and Kevin. We've been doing this 113 weeks. Like that's a lot of topics to come up with, and we can keep doing that. But what we want to make sure is we're staying relevant to our audience needs, and we have a great audience that shows up every single week. So we want to make sure that we're helping you discussing things that you need to hear because the value is not just from us. A lot of times these conversations, as you did today, the value is added from the audience. There's perspectives that are added, things like that. Okay, so clarity and communication. All right, so that's what we'll do next week is we'll dive into
sure.
clarity in communication, no problem.
And Zaid, my apologies. I remember reading it, but the Skills USA event, I know it's hard to imagine, but I was all in, laser focused for actually about 2 weeks. And I'm usually pretty good at handling a number of things, but I was so intent physically and emotionally that I didn't see much else. And so thank you for reminding. And I believe the URL you're referencing, it may be the one that I posted, and I'll post it here. And basically, it is the URL for my posts and activities. That's where it's easy to find our live show each time because it pops up in there even if you don't see it in notification. So thank you for that. But uh, that is a way to find it even if you don't register for the event and so on. And I appreciate, Zaid, your commitment to being there. You're very consistent and appreciate it. So um, we got
That's it.
to, yeah, we've got to do this internal work. And if we don't do it, we're going to continue to live unsustainably. Just to be blunt, it causes us health problems. So be
Just
willing to
just
do the
leaving people with it out there, Kev. It's what I already said. You can read every self development book in the world. You can get the biggest gurus in the world to tell you all these different tips. But if the state of how you're living internally doesn't change, if you don't support yourself, if you don't take care of yourself, if you don't do it sustainably, it either is not going to matter or you're never going to reach the potential of what you can get out of those tips and tricks and self help books and things like that. So come back first to what you can control as your internal state.
do the take the time. What can I control? What can I influence? If I can't control or influence it, I need to do something to let go of it. Whatever that is for me, it's prayer and God, trusting God with it. And it's a choice. It's not easy. So, yeah, I appreciate the clarifications, Aid. And that is our website URL. And if you click on that, go to the very first page there, you'll see it very prominently to take the stress assessment. And love to have any and everyone do that. It's free. And no, you're not going to get spammed because of your email. The only people that see that's Anton and I, and we promise to only sell it to the best possible. No, I'm just kidding. We don't sell your emails to anybody. It's there for us to be in communication if you want it. We don't even force that. So, sorry for the technical issues early on. The technical issues was me. I clicked the wrong thing when I set it up yesterday. So I have to own that. That's what I do as a leader. And we'll get it right next week when we talk about clarity and communication. And that's an important topic because it relates to even what we talked about today. Sometimes the reason we lose our composure is we're not good and clear in our communication, or someone else is not. And so, Anton, closing thoughts?
I mean, we've got it covered. I mean, honestly, folks, just keep showing up. As always, I'm just really grateful for the audience. You know, I was talking to my friend yesterday about this, and I just couldn't keep doing this. Me and Kevin couldn't keep possibly doing this if we were talking to ourselves. Your engagement is so greatly appreciated. It matters, right? You have no idea how much your engagement matters. So just thank you from the bottom of my heart. Like, I am so grateful for it.
Ditto. Well, thanks everyone. God bless. Have an amazing rest of the week. Hopefully, you'll be able to practice keeping your composure by doing some internal work. So, thank you, everyone. We will see you next week, same time. Look forward to it. Bye.
Bye, everybody.